Good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to the November 13th, 2024 meeting of the Mecklenburg County Environmental Stewardship Committee. I am Commissioner Elaine Powell, recovering from the flu, so please excuse my frog voice, and I serve as our chair. We are committed to the important work of maintaining and enhancing our environment so that all residents will thrive. A virtual attendance option is offered as an alternate mode of accessibility to our meeting today. We welcome the public who have been provided a call-in number to access this meeting. Those attending virtually are asked to display your full name on Zoom, as our attendance is recorded for the minutes. Additionally, virtual attendees are asked to remain muted and use the chat box to submit any comments that you would like to have read aloud to the committee. The agenda, meeting minutes, and presentations for today were sent out to those already on the distribution list. If anyone did not receive these and you would like an electronic copy of any presentation material provided today, please make your request via email to Erin Stanforth. Her email is Erin, ERIN, Stanforth, STANFORTH, @mecnc.gov. We will begin today's meeting by having each board member identify him or herself so that the record will reflect who is present and participating in this meeting. I am Mecklenburg County Commissioner Elaine Powell. I represent the people of District 1 in North Mecklenburg and serve as chair of the Environmental Stewardship Committee. Next, I will ask my colleagues to make their introductions as I call out their districts. District 4.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mark Jarrell, District 4.
District 6.
Good afternoon. I'm Susan Rodriguez McDowell, elected by the people of District 6.
And at-large Commissioner Altman is unable to make it today. For the record, 3 commissioners have acknowledged their presence for this meeting. Therefore, we have a quorum. I will now ask Erin Stanforth to assist with other introductions for people who are joining us today.
Sure. Thanks, Commissioner Powell. With us virtually, we have Abby Wyatt, Allison Rhodes, Dr. Barbara Worley, Beth Wyatts, Betsy Abrams, Danielle Jones, Don Ciccarelli, Ebenezer Charlaputi, Aisha Pierce, Jeff Smithberger, John McCullough, Chris Matthews, Jacqueline McNeil, Olivia Edwards, Richard Matulis, Sam DeRosa, Susan Hall, Terry Alsop, Terry Lansdell, and Sheldon Turner. And my name is Erin Stanforth. I'm the Sustainability and Resiliency Manager for Mecklenburg County.
Kathleen Reed, Sustainability Consultant for Mecklenburg County.
Good afternoon, Sean Carter, Chief Equity Inclusion Officer, Mecklenburg County.
Good afternoon, Demetrius Cox Thomas of North Carolina Cooperative Extension, the Mecklenburg County Center.
Good afternoon, Leslie Johnson, Deputy County Manager.
Jenny Harper, Community Relations Coordinator and newest member of the Public Information Department.
Rebecca Herbert, Community Relations Manager.
Leslie Rhodes, Air Quality Director.
My name's Martin Miller and I'm in District 6 and she has signed up for another term trying to manage me.
Number 1 job.
Welcome. For the record, excuse me. I will now recognize that we have minutes to approve, and I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Moved.
Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Rodriguez McDowell, seconded by Commissioner Jarrell. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And the motion carries and the minutes are approved. I will now recognize Erin Stanforth, Mecklenburg County Sustainability and Resiliency Manager, and LaShawn Carter, Mecklenburg County Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer, to continue our discussion on the county's environmental justice framework.
Thanks, Commissioner Powell. So this is a lot of these slides we've seen before, but we'll go over them again. We had this conversation initially in April of 2024. And so briefly today, the overview of what we're going to be discussing is an overview of our Environmental Leadership Action Plan. We're going to talk about how environmental justice transforms sustainability and really what is environmental justice. We're going to chat about our environmental justice study findings, define the government's role, and then also get into what Mecklenburg County's areas of focus and proposed strategies are within that framework. So as you all are aware, we did pass, or you all rather endorsed our first environmental leadership action plan in March of 2021. For the purposes of this discussion, we're gonna be honing in on the justice and racial equity subsection to the policies and partnerships section of the ELAP. That's where we do talk about environmental justice. And so briefly, I'm gonna give just a quick repeat of the history of environmental justice. EJ, and excuse me, I interchange environmental justice and EJ together. It's just to save time. They mean the same thing. Environmental justice as a movement launched in Warren County, North Carolina in 1982. You can see a photo there of a protest that was planned in Warren County against a toxic waste landfill that was sited in a primarily African-American community. And while this was not a successful protest, it did spark a national conversation around environmental justice. And so in the mid 1980s, early 1990s, the Government Accountability Office, in partnership with the United Church of Christ, did studies looking at instances of toxic wastes and overlaid that data with our diversity data in this country. And you can see that map that's on the left side, and that center square is actually both sets of data overlaid together. They're almost mirror images of one another. And by 1994, excuse me, President Bill Clinton signed the first EJ executive order. By 2013, all 50 states and DC have instituted an environmental justice law, policy, or program. And so really, and again, you've seen this before, but just to refresh, when we think about environmental justice, it really forces us to relocate where the environment is. When I think about the environment, I think about a pristine mountainscape such as there, maybe a beautiful meadow, but not everyone has equitable access to these pristine landscapes of this nature. And so environmental justice forces us to redefine what counts as the environment to include where we live, work, play, learn, and eat. Environmental justice also reframes environmental issues. A good example of that is single-use plastic bottle waste reduction. Typically, we know from studies that primarily African-American communities, Latino communities prefer bottled drinking water over tap water. Often, if that issue is framed as an environmental illiteracy, perhaps the solution might be distributing reusable drinking water bottles, or perhaps a recycling system. When this issue is framed as an environmental justice issue, that points to the systemic mistreatment and mistrust of public drinking water systems, primarily in African-American and low-income communities. And lastly, environmental justice also redefines who counts as environmental stakeholders. When we think about environmental stakeholders, we think about at least for me, I think about the Sierra Club or the Audubon Society, and those are great groups. I'm not discounting their work. However, they are historically affluent, primarily white, primarily male. And so when we redefine who counts as environmental stakeholders to include Black, brown, and low wealth communities, along with grassroots activists, that really gives us a true depiction of what's happening on the ground related to environmental justice. And so I've been kind of dancing around what exactly is environmental justice, but just to ground us all, both the EPA and the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality define environmental justice as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. We like to take that a step further. Mecklenburg County recognizes that people of color, low moderate income households, and residents with fewer years of education are more likely to live in proximity to environmental injustices due to historical effects of systemic racism, which includes, but is not limited to, the availability of affordable housing, limited public engagement, NIMBYism, redlining, residential covenant restrictions, and segregation. And with that, I'm turning it over to Sean Carter to talk a bit more.
Thank you. So thank you. And so what I want to do today, or at least what I want to attempt to do, is have a conversation around the terms that often get thrown around in relationship to environmental justice work. And before we can do that, one thing we have to do is zoom out just a little bit and consider the contextual relationship between environmental justice with racial and social justice, and also economic justice, because those three forms of justice are the things that inform how we go about understanding equitable society. So quickly, I'm gonna define social justice And as it's the fair and equitable distribution of opportunities and rights, aiming to eliminate systemic inequalities and ensure that all individuals are treated with dignity and respect. And so if you think about how that is applied in the environmental standpoint, it's going right back to the framing conversation that Aaron just shared. Economic justice is the pursuit of fair economic systems where everyone has equal opportunities to achieve financial stability, access resources, and benefit from economic policies. So there's an alignment that takes place between our economic choices, our social choices, and our environmental choices. And so what I invite you to imagine really quickly is 3 overlapping circles of a Venn diagram. And when you see economic justice, environmental justice, and social justice overlap, that's where sustainability lives for us. If we can do those 3 things well, then we are going to be achieving the best outcomes possible. And so what we're going to do now is walk into some definition of equity terms. And so we're going to introduce the technical definition of some of these terms, but we'll also talk a little bit about how these terms shape our behaviors and cultural interactions. So what you see on your slide are the 6 primary dimensions of equity. And these terms are culture, dominant culture, equality, equity, inclusion, and race. We'll walk through each of them really quickly. The first one is culture. You can go to the next slide. Culture is the set of practices and beliefs shared by members of a particular group that distinguishes that group from other groups. And culture is dynamic. As every organism or systems of people come together, that system creates a culture. There's a culture in this room. It may only exist as long as we're together today, but we've established a culture for how we will share norms and values for being in the presence of one another a day. And so culture is such a dynamic thing that culture has the power to shape how we behave and operate in the context of each other. And there are things that underscore those behaviors. And that goes into the next slide. And one of the primary drivers of what underscores culture is the notion of a dominant culture. A dominant culture is a culture that are readily visible, while others may be hidden and not apparent. Dominant culture is not meant to be confused with racial dominance, because the dominant culture is designed by the people who hold the power in the room. And what we know is from an intersectional understanding is that those power shifts can past the prism of things like tenure, things like race, things like gender, many other forms of difference that can influence what power looks like inside of a room. And dominant culture is really the optimization of that power and how it executes itself in forming culture. And so dominant culture is what underscores the formulation of a culture. You can go to the next slide, please. The next is equality, and equality is the act of ensuring that every individual has an equal opportunity to make the most of their lives and talents. And what we like to say is that although we believe that socially talent is distributed equally, opportunity is not. And so there's an effort that needs to happen in order to ensure that those opportunities are distributed more equally and ultimately equitably. And so that goes to the next slide of equity. Equity is not to be confused with equality. It means the requisite allocation of resources in response to specific needs of a group. Again, what we know is that if we're trying to achieve equality as a society and know that equality to or access to opportunities is what makes a society fair, what's also true is that sometimes there are deficiencies that require additional support. And that's where equity comes in. And we can go to the next slide because this slide is something that you all have seen. And by now, many of us have been very aware of this graphic, but beyond the elegance of its visual simplicity, it underscores the connection to the environmental consequences of inequitable systems and what lives in the ground. And so one of my long-held challenges with this graphic, however, is that it pits equality and equity against one another in ways that undermines the virtues of equality, when in fact, in the absence of equality, equity cannot exist. It has to come first. If you think about the fight for civil rights, that was a fight for equality, making sure we have access to the resources that everyone has access to. Equity is now saying, once that has been done, we can now explore and interrogate where the gaps are and provide additional resources to fill those gaps. And looking at the broad array of people and difference, understanding that many different people can demonstrate many different needs and being flexible enough to be able to address those needs in real time. And that's essentially the difference between equality and equity, is being able to address those differences in real time. You can go to the next slide, please. Inclusion is the act of including and accommodating people historically excluded because of their race, gender, sexuality, age, ability, or any form of difference. Those intersectional dimensions inform difference in ways that says, if we are thinking about this through the lens of difference, we are better able to understand where the needs are, and we can address those needs in real time and in practical ways. That is, you're using the appropriate tools. One colloquial way to say is you're providing the right service at the right time for the right people. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's making sure you understand who your audience is and deploying the right resources at the right time, and that audience feels included in your choice. So they can advocate for themselves. They feel welcome to the table to point out the things that they need and know with confidence that you will be responsive to those needs in the effort to serve them. And race is the concept developed as a social construct and originally referring to groups who shared cultural things in common. The idea that race was a scientific matter and that people could be characterized by their physical features was used to justify the subjugation and oppression of people of color and perpetuate the domination of the white race. Now, since race has long been a manifestation of power and oppression, it has also been used as a weapon of divisiveness. So as you're trying to solve problems, race is often used as the device that will divide people whose interests would typically be aligned, but the differences in race pull them apart. Right. And so it can be used as a political and social construct, and it has evolved over time from its original intent as a form of suppression and power. In America, we arrive at race as a construct for dominance and justification. However, now we use it as a form of segregation and division. And so we are working to figure out ways to be more thoughtful about how that division has, the legacy of that division has influenced our choices and behaviors as a system, and eradicate those influences as we make new choices and new decisions. You can go to the next slide, please. So, yeah, go to the next. I don't know why that did that. So going to the next slide, we're going to talk about a couple other terms that show up often in this work. One, and if you think about this as a sequence, these terms inform one another and are often misused. So the first is stereotype. The stereotype is the idea that a group holds a certain set of characteristics, right? If you have this assumption that a group has a certain characteristics, it's a shortcut for how I respond to an individual, because I'm using this cognitive shortcut that allows me to make assumptions about who you are, what you represent. And it encumbers our ability to have a thoughtful dialogue and conversation. The next is prejudice. Prejudice is the feeling that one doesn't like a group of people, and this is often based on the stereotype. Because I believe this certain group of people are this way, I don't like that group of people. And ultimately what that means is those prejudice choices are informed by the fallacy of stereotypes, and so it creates a term that I like to call an Ouroboros, where the cycle keeps eating itself. So for every choice of a bad stereotype, you make a prejudice decision, and the cycle continues. You can go to the next slide, please. And the next term is the most often misused term of them all, and it's the term bigotry. I will pause really quickly to ask you, our esteemed board members, are you familiar with any forms of or people represented in popular culture that are considered bigots? Yeah. Care to throw out a name? Anyone? Archie Bunker, yes. Archie Bunker. Archie Bunker is probably the most famous example of a bigot in popular culture. And Archie Bunker is not the only, though. Bigoted people is a archetype made famous by Norman Lear, but it's an archetype that exists in popular culture because it's a shortcut to tell the story of stereotypes, prejudice, and bias. And so Archie Bunker obviously was most bigoted towards Black people. His best friend or one of his close neighbors was George Jefferson, and the source of their conflict was often racial dynamics. What made Archie bigoted, though, was not because he had a relationship with George. It was because he believed the stereotypes despite his relationship with George. And that's what bigotry is. And other examples really quickly is Al Bundy is an example of another bigot. He's bigoted towards women. He has a personal relationship with Peg and Kelly, has all these ill-informed beliefs about women. Eric Cartman is another one more recently. He's from South Park. He has a bigoted relationship towards his friend Kyle. Although Kyle is Jewish, he has a bigoted understanding of who Jewish people are in American society, despite his personal relation with Kyle. And so bigotry is the most complex of all of the terms because it's a belief system. And belief systems are deep structures. And these are things that are taught and learned at a very young age and reinforced by popular culture and the media. And so it's a dynamic that constantly shifts and moves and is redefined every generation. And the next one is discrimination. Discrimination is actions based on stereotypes, prejudice, or bigoted beliefs. These are the actual actions. So because you believe in these stereotypes, or because you have this prejudiced sense, or because you've made these assumptions, you are now making active choices, and that's what discrimination is. And the last one is the ism. The ism is the system, and it's a system, and none of these other terms individually account for the system. And so racism, sexism, phobias like gender, homophobia, xenophobia, these are all systems or patterns of behavior, and none of those other terms represent those patterns, right? And so we're going to go to a quick video to talk a little bit about what I referenced earlier in terms of what lives in the ground, and then we'll close out from there. Uh-oh. Awesome.
If you have a lake in front of your house and one fish is floating belly up dead, it makes sense to analyze the fish. What is wrong with it? Imagine the fish is one student failing in the education system. We'd ask, did it study hard enough? Is it getting the support it needs at home? But if you come out to that same lake and half the fish are floating belly up dead, what should you do? This time you've got to analyze the lake. Imagine the lake is the education system and half the students are failing. This time we'd ask, might the system itself be causing such consistent
many different systems. And so, oh, you got a,
Sorry, everybody.
it's the echo. Are you good?
Now I'm good.
All right. So ultimately what that means is when you have these multiple systems that are contributing to these poor outcomes, the root cause analysis is necessary in order to unravel what those causes are. And oftentimes those causes are the factors that we would consider to be the justice anchors. Those justice anchors are the things that undermine the equitable society that we're all hoping to achieve. They cross the prisms of our social, our economic, and our environmental justice systems. Those are the things that underpin that. I am not doing the video justice, but that's okay. But ultimately, it is really the understanding that what lives in the ground is what ultimately informs whether or not the fish die. Okay. So last slide, and I'll be out of your way, is so there's ultimately three things that happen across systems. The first is racial inequity looks the same across systems. And similar to the fish metaphor, it does not matter where the lake is. If there is inequity, it's going to look the same no matter what. So bodies of water can look the same, but the conditions are what really is determining whether or not the fish thrive inside of the water. So racial inequity looks the same across systems. The next slide, the next one says socioeconomic differences do not explain these inequities, meaning that if you're looking through the prism of difference, what the research has shown is that the socioeconomic difference does not explain why these inequities exist. There's usually something more insidious going on. And that's why the analysis is necessary. That's why when you're looking at it through an environmental lens, you have to go beyond just what you see from a community's socioeconomic status standpoint to understand why those disparities exist the way that they do. You have to go one layer beyond. And then lastly, inequities are caused by systems regardless of the people's cultural behavior. So it's the systems that govern and create and set the culture of the community, not the people that make up the community. Because remember, if you think about the ideas of dominant culture, the dominant culture establishes the conditions of the culture writ large for those that are oppressed or suppressed by the dominant group. And so systems oftentimes govern, and systems oftentimes inform and create and influence the culture of the neighborhoods that live within it. And so ultimately those outcomes are informed by the system. The last thing I'll say is that the last box is how you can get to individual actors operating in opposition of their own interests, either actively or passively. It's because they are operating within a system that's not designed to support them. And so you can be inside of a system and know it's not in your best interest, but still behave in ways that suppress your best interest. And that's because of the dynamics of the system creating the culture. I'll turn it back over to you. Yes. Sorry.
Before we move on, because I think this is a really important setup for why this is part of our environmental leadership action plan.
Yes.
You were talking about cognitive shortcuts and different systems and all these different things. I keep hearing over and over in the news, and I think it matters right now in this moment. I keep hearing people saying, especially Mecklenburg County, different urban areas are like, we're described as being so woke. Talk about wokeism.
Okay. Great question. And so wokeness is a term that has been politicized to undermine the idea of being awakened to the things that might impact the quality of your life, right? There's nothing political about being awakened to the things that you should care about. But the term wokeism is the undermining of that reality. In fact, what you would want from an informed society is people that are aware and informed to the things that matter to them and have the capacity, the skills, and the bandwidth to advocate for those things. And essentially, the way the term woke originally arrived on the scene was saying that in order to advocate appropriately, you need to awaken to the conditions that surround you and inform your daily life and the decisions that you are making. And once you are aware of those things, you need to act on it, right? And that is what woke came from. The fact that woke has been turned into this political term is in opposition of how the word arrived in the first place. So there's so much more, but that's essentially where we are.
And I really appreciate it. And so it just, in this moment, in this time, I think we really have to have that mindfulness. And I was in a meeting yesterday with Commissioner Jarrell, and I'm going to quote you forever. Because I think we were talking to a candidate for something, a candidate that was applying for our board, about what is important to us as a board. And he said, it's important for me that our board members have the ability to look beyond their own worldview. And I feel like that's part of like becoming more aware. Learning is like, we don't have the same life experiences, but how do we open up to learn other life experiences, to become knowledgeable and to change systems?
Yes. And true awareness is not limited to the confines of your own reality.
Right. Right. And so I think that sometimes when we talk about like we're out in with different counties, when we're with different counties in North Carolina or in the nation, and we're talking about how we're going to have this environmental justice component, some people really don't understand why this is so significant, why it's so important, and how it does impact health and wellness in addition to many other things. But health and wellness is my life experience, so that's how I see it. And we all see it differently, but how do we do a better job of communicating the importance of it with respect to the environment?
And I think it's about the stories we tell about it, because I think there's no getting around personal interest informing people's choices. And I think the more robust our stories are, the more opportunity we have for people to find themselves inside of those stories, because that's what people are really listening for. Where do I live in that story? And where does my circumstance and the things that I care about live inside of that story? And I think what we have to get better at is telling fuller, richer, and more textured stories. And those stories creating more access points for more people, so that people understand where they fit in the intent of this conversation of environmental, economic, or social justice.
Thank you. It's really important to me that you are here.
Thank you.
And it's really important to me that we do tell good stories. And Dr. Johnson, it's really important to me that we are responsive.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so keeping Sean's fantastic presentation in mind, we do feel it's important for us to define what our role is in this concept of environmental justice. We believe that government should foster environmental justice, excuse me, through processes that address, mitigate, and amend past injustices while enabling proactive, community-led solutions for the future. And so that looks like, one, ensuring that representation matters. Impacted communities are represented in our decision-making processes, and those processes should be fair, transparent, accessible, and provide opportunities for impacted communities to participate within them. And last, but definitely not least, we must ensure that environmental benefits and impacts are distributed equitably and/or are mitigated so that no one community bears a disproportionate burden. And so just kind of ground us again, you all have seen this before, but let's revisit the past. We did have a quantitative data collection analysis that occurred beginning in October of 2021. We analyzed over 100 GIS data layers and delineated those down to the census block group level. We were seeking the answers to three overarching indices. One, Where in the county is the most overburdened quality of life? 2, where in the county is it most difficult to access services and community resources that we offer? And then 3, where in the county are environmental burdens most disproportionately impacting communities? Environmental burdens include heat island effect, flooding, things along those lines. And so we collected that information, but it was just that, it was just data, it was just the why, excuse me, it was just the what and the where, it wasn't the why and the so what. And so we embarked on a first round of community outreach. We conducted 10 sessions over the course of a whole host of different organizations and locations in the county. And we heard that the following issues were elevated as concerns from these members of the community. And those areas included air pollution, drinking water quality, water contamination, green and open space access, improving the relationship between the government and its residents, the prevalence of litter, and transparency from the government with respect to decision-making. However, this first round of outreach was not as populated as we would have liked. There were, we held 10 sessions, as I mentioned, over the course of about 3 months throughout the county, and we had 50 people show up in total, not representative sample. And so we changed tactics. We worked with our Office of Strategy and Innovation. They put out a survey each year, each summer, that essentially it monitors or asks a whole host of different questions from all walks of life within Mecklenburg County. And we asked, of these issues that we heard in our initial round of community engagement, you, survey taker, what are your top 3 biggest concerns, and could you rank those in order of importance? And so this is a representative sample of our residents. It says down here in that corner that my banner is covering. You can see that at the top of the list is drinking water quality, waste and litter, groundwater contamination, et cetera. And so while this is great data, we still knew that we needed to go back out into the community to hear more around what are people experiencing related to environmental justice. And then also we needed folks to almost not validate, but to help us kind of populate that quantitative data that we had initially collected. And so we reached out to, and recognizing that our first method of engagement was not as effective because we only had 50 people show up to our sessions. And so we reached out to community leaders and residents, asking if there was a group or a meeting that we could present to, asking folks for feedback around environmental justice. We presented to 13 different neighborhood associations, churches, local groups, and shared what we had heard, and then sought additional feedback. So in total, we've interacted with over 500 folks around environmental justice, and these pieces of feedback and sentiments were incorporated into our final environmental justice strategies. And so this is a kind of a map of on the left side, so the pink, orange, and yellow map. Those are zip codes that we have conducted outreach within. Pink is 2022, orange is 22 and 23, and yellow is 23. And then on the right side of the map, the blue and light green map, that is our breakdown of racial demographics in our county. And you can see, of course, the crescent and the wedge is where our crescent is where our most diverse spaces are in this county, and then the wedge is the least diverse spaces. And we really wanted to mirror where our most diverse spaces were in conducting this outreach. And then in addition, we did get a lot of input from the Air Quality Advisory Council around areas of concern because they do have an environmental justice committee within the Air Quality Advisory Council that helped us to really guide where we're going to conduct some of this outreach as well. And so with all of this taken into account, we did organize our 2.5 years worth of engagement and data around these 6 areas of focus. Areas of focus include air quality, water supply and flooding, litter and waste reduction, green and open space access, community advocacy and outreach, and governance and accountability. And so with all of that data in mind, we knew we needed to come up with a framework that we could truly implement. That being said, we also knew that we needed to come up with a framework that we could frankly not control, but we're under our sphere of influence. And so we worked directly with advisory groups along with our kind of subject matter experts within the county to come up with many of the strategies that you see. This is a repeat of a slide we just saw. The percentages that are on the left are the response rates that we received based on area of focus. And then the comments to the right are, those are 2 comments we received in 2 different engagements that we held. So just wanted to ground everybody as to what that is. And so I thought that we could maybe look at these, each area of focus individually, look at our strategies, and then we'll also have some health data that we have added based on the last time that we were here. And so within air quality, we are committed to equitable protection from the health effects of air pollution and opportunity for involvement in decision-making. And to do that, we have two goals. One is to reduce air pollution from cars and trucks, and the other is to provide data and increase engagement with residents. And you can see that there's 3 strategies listed there to get us to that goal. I'm not going to read them out loud. It's a lot of words. Don't want to bore everybody even more. I'm going to advance if that's all right. And moving into water supply and flooding, we are committed to working towards alleviating these environmental burdens equitably, as well as facilitating opportunity for involvement in decision-making. And to do that, we have 2 overarching goals, the first of which is to infuse environmental justice principles into existing stormwater processes and programs. And then the other goal for this section is to improve and promote awareness of lake and stream water quality, as well as stormwater mitigation tactics. Then you can see that there are some strategies underneath each of those goals, to implement those goals to get us there. I'm gonna keep advancing. Okay. And then getting into litter and waste reduction, which is an interesting topic because we don't necessarily provide any collection of waste and recycling. So just was an interesting dynamic. Although Mecklenburg County does not provide any residential waste or recycling collection, we commit to working towards alleviating these environmental burdens equitably, as well as facilitating the opportunity for involvement in decision-making. And to do that, we have 2 overarching goals. The first being to reduce litter on publicly owned roadside property and county-maintained streams and creeks, and then also to increase access to solid waste programs and infuse environmental justice principles into project planning. Beautiful stuff. And then getting into park and open space access, we are committed to working towards, again, alleviating these environmental burdens equitably, as well as facilitating the opportunity for involvement in decision-making. And to do that, our 2 goals with this section are to work to preserve and improve our tree canopy, and then also ensure equitable investments in priority communities. And additionally, we have our community advocacy and outreach. The county commits to serving as a resource and a catalyst for community-focused environmental advocacy. And to do that, we have 2 goals. One is to advocate for the equitable access to community resources, and then also ensure environmental representation within rezoning as well as new development projects. And then last but certainly not least is our accountability and governance section. We do commit to transparency and accountability through the implementation of this framework. And to do that, we commit to investing in publicly available data to ensure monitoring success in our environmental justice communities, as well as to support the accountability of this framework through the establishment of an environmental justice community partnership group. So we have had an initial meeting with the Environmental Justice Community Partners Group. These were residents that were interested in serving within this space. We are still working to seek 11 to 13 members representing the 6 towns, City of Charlotte, as well as local environmental justice advocates, we are planning on meeting bi-monthly virtually in the evenings once this framework is endorsed by the Board of County Commissioners. The terms of service of this group are 12 calendar months, the option to renew for 2 consecutive years. And of course, the members must be residents of Mecklenburg County. Can't forget that. And last, but definitely not least, we wanted to share these environmental justice indicators. This was requested when we first brought this information back in April to you all. Excuse me, the Environmental Stewardship Committee requested additional health indicators for our environmental justice framework. So we worked with the Department of Health to come up with these 4 indicators that as defined by public health related to environmental justice. And you can see that it was found that the top zip codes for all indicators are listed here. And just to ground everyone, we did list the zip code along with what district that they were in, just so not everybody knows all their zips. I certainly don't. And I will say that these top zips reflect our targeted outreach areas that we went to either in the first round or the second round of environmental justice outreach. And so with that, we have taken this, the framework to our executive team. We are here, it is November 13th. We are presenting our framework to the ESC for endorsement, and we're hoping to planning on presenting rather the EJ framework to public policy on December 10th. And then we're hoping to submit this framework as a consent item to the board in early 2025. And with that, we'll take any questions, comments, or concerns. Thank you.
A lot of thoughts, gonna go through them quickly. One, I think every committee should see both presentations. I think every committee should be, and probably all of our advisory boards as well. I know that's not practical or probably even possible, but I do believe that every committee, this is relevant to every committee. When we talk about environmental justice, I love the way we frame it with respect to an ecosystem, not the traditional thought process around the traditional environment that when you think about or parks or trees or those exact trees and limbs, exactly. Because that's what it means to people of color, in my opinion, not to speak for people generally, but environmental justice is this ecosystem. When you go to communities of color and you talk and people are thinking just water or something like that. And it excludes a lot of people from participating because they're like, I don't have time for that. I'm trying to get a job. I'm trying to have transportation and other needs, right? So I love how we've incorporated the ecosystem of environmental justice into this framework. Sean, the way you ground, and of course, Aaron, you know, I had the opportunity to see the in-depth presentation previously, but the way you grounded it with the terms and the way we kind of throw terms around loosely, I think it's just really, really important. And so I think that's excellent. I'm not warm and fuzzy about having, it seems like there's a separation between air quality and where we are with the environmental justice people, you know, whoever's involved. I don't know why it wouldn't be combined. Or I don't know, I'm hoping that there's not just the air quality EJ and then whatever this other group that we're trying to do. I don't know, and maybe it's not practical, but I'd like to kind of understand that, Leslie, a little bit in just a second. Our community advocacy and outreach goals, park and open space goals, I think I'm completely aligned. Our goals 1 through 8 go through more of the traditional sort of aspects of when you think about environmental justice. Where I'm disconnected with that, Dr. Johnson, is I'm missing what do we do as board members? Like, I have no clue what's attainable, what's the goal, like in 28215, my zip code. Me signing off on this, what does that mean for residents in 28215 that Reedy Creek runs through that zip code? So are we cleaning it? We're gonna have it cleaned by what time? Am I drinking that water? Am I, like, I have no idea what those goals mean, to be honest with you. So I'm not at a point where I could probably sign off on it today because I'm disconnected from 1 through 8 in understanding what those mean. Tree canopy, I get, makes total sense to me. And then the last thing, so that was really Sean, I did have a couple of things, with you. I also would like to see in this framework, and just because one commissioner wants to see it doesn't mean we're doing it, all right? I'm just speaking for me right now. We talked about systems. I don't have a clue how to break the systems. I don't even have a clue of what systems that we need to attack with respect to this framework. I want to understand that. I mean, I know we have good intentions, but I love this slide where you talked about inequities are caused by systems regardless of people's cultural behavior. It's what we see in government, right? We know we want to do the right thing. We know we have all of these measures that we put in place, but the system still produces the outcomes that we keep talking about from year to year. I gotta have an understanding of how to break the system. What it means, how do we crack the egg? Which I just don't have a clue right now. So I know I threw a lot at everybody. And I know I know you got it, but I was just gonna say, I know it's a lot, but that's where I'm coming from today. Thank you, guys.
So thank you for your
Thank you, Madam
comments.
Chair.
I may lean on some others and my responses, but the first one I'm gonna try to respond to was your inquiry with regards to air quality. So what I wanna make sure you're clear on is a lot of the county's business has separate advisory boards. So there's a separate advisory board for stormwater, there's a separate advisory board for air quality, there's a separate advisory board for the efforts that we do around solid waste. So there's already separate advisory boards. Notwithstanding that, we're also trying to engage with individuals who may not want to just be intentional about that silo or that discipline or that area, but who want to be part of the input and throughput as it relates to the broader environmental justice. And so what may happen in this example, like some of the conversations of people that we've started to engage with, those individuals may be on an individual advisory board, but also have raised their hand, I have an interest to be in this space as well. So it'll be a both and. So that will kind of hopefully understand that as we're trying it on. And so that's what I would say there. So, and our goal is long-term, it may not be that we're really getting individuals that are serving on existing advisory boards, but it's more intentional to get representatives that are connected to the neighborhoods and the communities, not necessarily your subject matter expert, right? Because in the existing advisory boards, we may lean into more individuals have singular interest in the topic and or they have singular expertise in the topic. Whereas this one, we're trying to ensure that we're getting the resident input no matter what the topic is on. Does that help in that regard? With regards to the goals, valid lens of thinking, when Aaron noted that we started, well, what I would say is this is a framework, so it's not be all. It's the first step and it will have its own iteration. So it will evolve and grow as we evolve and grow as an organization. So we wanted to put in our first response was aligned to those comments that we heard from the community. When they heard environmental justice, it was water and air and those types of things. So those are the things that seem to be the first wave of alignment. While we recognize that it's systemic, and so it deals with housing, it does with other issues, but the first ones that we tackled ended up being those ones that came from the voice of the community for our area of focus. Okay, it doesn't mean.
Was that because Dr. Johnson, those were the options presented, or that's what they came up with?
So what I would say is it was iterative when they got to the survey, it wasn't open-ended. When we did ways of engagement, it was open-ended. So it was a both and. Then what I would layer to it is, this is where I'm gonna eventually take a hitch to Sean. when you really think about environmental justice in its modern day operationalization, and it's not the water and the trees and leaves and that kind of limited viewpoint, it hooks very much to what Sean is driving the organization to do with regards to our organization's equity and inclusion plans and efforts. And so there's under what I'm gonna call under Aaron's sphere of influence right now. If we say we're gonna try to tackle affordable housing, that's not in his sphere. So then we're gonna have to lean and shift organizationally to Sean, and which is why Sean is working in companion with Aaron on what we're doing. And so I know that Sean will eventually be sharing with the board the overarching space of where we're going with equity and inclusion. And what we're ultimately trying to do is it's kind of like a culture shift where I believe we're landing as an organization, which is the right place to be. You shouldn't have, which is why this isn't called a plan. You shouldn't have an equity plan and a this plan and this. What we should be trying to do is, like when you go home and you try to plan, oh, what I want for dinner and what's going to be the food in my refrigerator, one of the lenses you take in consideration, oh, do I have the money to do it? Then you also think about your refrigerator. I'm not going to put anything in my refrigerator that somebody may be allergic to. I'm going to make sure. So you take all of these perspectives as you make that decision of what you're going to put in the refrigerator. And that same way, we are trying to cultivate our organization. As we're making decisions, are we taking that equity lens because it's systemic in the decision-making process that we're doing? So like one of the examples that's in there, which was the retrofit program, and you've heard me probably use these two examples before, the retrofit or the buyout program. I'll use the buyout program. The buyout program, which is a great program that we have, and it's award-winning and it's innovative, and we're being intentional of saying if we know that there's properties in the floodplain, we reach out to residents and ask them from a volunteer perspective if they have an interest in selling their property so we can get that property out of the floodplain. Floodplains in our community exist in multiple zip codes, right? One that is predominantly dominant and is in, I'm gonna say, in the Dilworth area. But it's also on the west side, okay? If I choose to buy out your property at real value in Dilworth, I may have to buy it out for $1 million, $1.25 million, whatever. And you probably have a choice of where you can go and still live in Mecklenburg County. If I do that same program and apply it to somebody on the west side, their value of their home, because the inequities in our ecosystem, their value of their home may be $300,000, but guess what? While that sounds good, and maybe more what they pay for it, they may not be able to continue to live in Mecklenburg County if we gave them the $300,000. So we're now having to say, okay, even though we stood up a program, and although in our lens, and I forgot which graphic it would have been for Sean, to say we both people can apply and get and participate in the program, it really isn't equitable, right? Because this person over in the west side, while they could participate, they may have to choose to relocate, and that's not what we want. So we're having to now reassess that program so we can have it from an equity lens. And the same for multiple things. So I think what we're trying to do is cultivate the change throughout. And eventually, I'm not saying this may go away, and I'm not trying to discount this, but eventually we should be aligning this effort with what Sean is doing.
Yeah, in that example, participation is what's equal, but then the allocation of resources is what is equitable, right? And that's why those things are often seen hand in hand, and why we pose the question the way that we do, that allows for that equality to live alongside the equity, because you need both, truly. Yeah.
I think what we're organization is, so now to your part about your own zip codes or something like that, there may be some things that show up, like I don't recall if in your district there's anything that's in the flood zone, even though I'm sure there is, right? And so to what degree are we marketing to those people in the lake and those residents and those households? But that will align to them because that's the product, right? Some of the other things that will have to happen after this will be an implementation plan. So if you endorse, the board endorses and say, yep, we're good for you to start moving in this space, The other things that we'd have to contemplate is, okay, what are we gonna be doing differently with regards to, one of the things about drinking water was, how do we get information out and partner with the city and help people become more informed as it relates to that? So those would be more actionable things that we would align ourselves in. Once it's endorsed, how do we start implementing it and layer the data, because it will vary what is most important. And I remember there was a period of time that we did share you data by your district. And so what's in your district may be different than what's in Commissioner Powell's district, it's whatever, where we need to put that area of focus, because it's different types of needs. But I hear you with regards to, it's kind of hard to get your arms around what it means and what you have to do. But at a minimum, what I would say is the board needs to continue to ensure that we bring that equity lens to everything that we do.
You know, I was gonna say. Ultimately, I think that's where you all landed, where you made racial disparities a cross-cutting factor across all of those main board priorities. And that's the point, right? Because systems are fluid and they're dynamic. The only way that you can disrupt a system is if the change is embedded, and it has to cut across everything. And so to Leslie's point, that is why we're looking at our equity work, trying to interrogate our structures, our systems, and our structures, our choices, and our processes, so that we have new norms. And that's really the only way. And and going back really to one other thing that I said was, when you think about those concentric circles, economic justice, social justice, environmental justice, those things overlap truly. And in order for us to dismantle the system, we have to be paying attention to all three at once. And that's how we get where we're disrupting the systems of inequity that live inside everything that we do.
That I would share, and I don't know if this is what we want to contemplate, because how we've evolved and grown. What I will say in this space, everything that's in the Environmental Leadership Action Plan is where we're now being more intentional and more committed to say, how should we be going about this? Are we doing it from multiple lenses, not just financially, not just this, that, and the other, but are we wearing the equity lens? And that's what my team and others that are partners are now changing the way that we look at things. Now, are we going to always find those solutions instantly? No, but I'm challenging them that that's the way we need to be looking through things. And that's the intent, because in theory, what we will then do is take the Environmental Leadership Action Plan and layer in to say, there's some kind of statement that we're saying that we're going to always take this perspective as we go about our work. And again, eventually we may have to have our equity inclusion plan get rebranded and renamed, and it may be environmental justice, because again, ultimately the overarching of all those things of what it is in the system, of the things that have been elevated, are outside of the sphere of this topical area, and we may have to eventually let Sean completely own it.
We are, and we're going to be revising that entire plan next summer. So as we conclude this round of strategic business planning, we will be revising our equity action planning process to kind of be the tailwind of that process.
Thank you. This conversation is just scratching the surface. And I really appreciate, the conversation. I think, we have to really not just say this, but we have to really do it. And I feel like a lot of times it's really hard to stand for things when you're being asked to support things that might not align with these goals. And, it may not be expedient to stand up for these goals, as we know. And so I think it's a real challenge to, I love your three circles and saying how, we need to look at the three circles in all of our decision making. And as I'm sitting here thinking about the decisions that are coming up for us that are not necessarily in this committee, they're not talking about the environment. They're talking about, incentives for a new development on Providence Road, or, you know, just like all of the things that are coming around to us, we have to really make sure we're putting it through this grid and that we're standing strong with that lens and not going with what's expedient. We have to become, you know, we have to really stand up to the pressures. And so I'm excited that when you speak this into the universe, you know, about governance and accountability and, you know, like, once you say it, you got to do it. And I'm excited that we're saying it, and it's going to be hard to do it. And we have to do it together. Mhm.
Being very intentional about how we go about what we're doing. It's, and you've heard me often enough, you know, I'm a person that's, I told somebody the other day, I'm an actionable chick, but you know, I have to be able to walk the whatever we talk, right? And so, like I said, the team knows that I interface with where we're going and how we're going about it. And you see examples of it, even like in economic development. I know I don't want to talk about that, but we're being intentional about what we're doing, and the equity shows up differently. We push the envelope of what is public and trying to push that vantage point in how we go about what we're doing. And we're going to continue to do that because the underlying thing, even though I believe it in my own morals and values and principalities, it's also being supported by this board as the undercurrent of all of our priorities. And so that's just the way we're doing it. At least that's the way everything in my portfolio is going, you know, just that's the lens we have to have.
And Commissioner Rodriguez, McDowell, and Jarrell, you had mentioned or asked the question of, well, what can I do as an individual commissioner? And while we don't have the answer for each of those strategies, one thing that I can tell you from an equity standpoint is ask yourself, as you're making and considering any choice on behalf of your constituents, 3 questions. Is it justifiable economically? Is it justifiable socially? Is it justifiable environmentally? If you can affirmatively answer those questions, then you can make a sound choice on behalf of those you represent. That's from an equity standpoint. And that to me is the architecture for being able to stand up to any opposition, because you've passed the prism or the muster of justice. And from there, you can frame whatever argument you need to make or you would want to, representing those that you care about.
So thank you for, I'm really having a struggle of talking today because of my flu, but thank you for the presentation and all of the conversation on waste, the goal of waste. I hear a lot from, I don't know how much you heard from the communities that are concerned about asbestos, but I hear a lot about hazardous waste. And so I feel like that should be part of this. You know, proper disposable. How do you properly dispose of hazardous waste? And that, when we have a role in that in the county. So I feel like that should be part of this framework. And on the medical, let me see what page it was, where you listed the zip codes. What page is that?
Oh, yeah. There's nothing.
And so I'm guessing, like, you got this from the health department, or where did you get this? The health indicators on page,
From the public health department, from the Dr. Bernard Washington.
okay. There's so many more, like, I guess we can't put that in there without reliable proof to back it up.
One, we didn't want to overwhelm this conversation because we knew how heavy it was. And then 2, these were the health indicators that the public health department recommended we include.
I sent my colleagues an article yesterday, and I also sent it to Sean about the corridor of shame and where all these inequities are perpetuated. And Some of the things they mentioned, I've seen in real life, like the asthma, the prevalence of diabetes, kidney disease, lung issues. I mean, all these things because of where you live. And a lot of them were on I-95. And I think for me, part of the important part of today is the language around the work we're doing, making sure that people understand that it comes from an awareness of true suffering. Like it's not made up, it's real, it's true suffering. And so I love when Commissioner Jarrell said, you know, I took notes. How are we going to crack this egg? Because all of us have seen plans in the past, not from environmental stewardship, but plans where everything sounds good. And it's like Commissioner Jarrell says, well, how is that going to break the system? What do these goals mean? How are we going to measure them? What does this mean to residents? These are excellent questions. Like, how are we going to crack this egg? I think this is the beginning of cracking it, but we have to have that mindfulness all the time of this is serious work and we can't just, and that's why it is like we have never wavered on the cross-cuttingness of disrupting inequities. And we continue to help each other understand better because we all have come from different worldviews. And so we don't waver on our commitment to it. I think we all have a lot to learn. Like we're committed to that. But I guess like it's a great start, but how do we make it better? Like Commissioner Jarrell says, how do we make it so that people know that we're serious about embedding this change? Like how do we do that? Do you have any ideas?
Well, my answer to that question, I'm sorry, I keep forgetting. I apologize. My answer to that question is always going to be about the conversations we have in good faith and how we take into the frame someone else's point of view and perspective relative to the choices we make, particularly when we are empowered to make choices on behalf of other people. Because what oftentimes undermines our ability to make those choices is that we have not taken into our frame the points of views or perspectives of those who might not agree with us. And so it makes it more challenging to implement any change because opposition has not been considered. And when opposition has not been considered, you become devoid of their point of view. And so the vacuum of your choice never touches them. They never feel like they have to interact with it. They never feel like they have to buy into it. And you're not a part of their conversation and they're not a part of yours. And so the implementation is mitigated from the beginning. And so one of the reasons why it's so important that we cast wider nets for discourse is because you do want to invite that opposition in, not as conflict, but as discourse. And that's important in order for us to solve hard problems, right? And it sounds easy, but I know that it's not, right? But it's the reality that what we're trying to do here is challenging, and we're here because of that challenge. But the realities of solving it require all of our contribution. And the way it currently exists, the way these conversations are currently happening is that there is no invitation that's appealing to those that might want to solve the problem with you, but don't see their way into it. Right? Because it's a hold your nose hand invite. And that's not invitational. That is a invitation in spite of your presence. And I think we all could be part of resolving that first and understanding what a true invite looks like and being more disciplined in how we make those invites so that we can get a better sense of how we share the table of decision making and conversation to solve these hard problems. And that I think is one of the reasons why we're approaching equity the way we are.
I love that. Like, I can tell you're really, really deep thinking on this. And so I went to a community building meeting that changed my life. And tell me the name of that author.
Anand Jaraharadas.
Do you know that person?
Yes.
So when he was giving his speech, and I was at the breakfast table, and the people that I was with were from the Levine Museum of the New South.
Mhm.
And it was just like a magical morning, truly changed my life. When he was talking about the systems that perpetuate inequities. And you know, there had to be more than 1,000 people at that breakfast. And it was so powerful to me that I thought, oh, you know, all these bank executives were there and they were talking about what they're doing for affordable housing. And I was thinking that had to be touching to them. Like,
Mhm.
they're part of the system that perpetuates inequities. Like,
Mhm.
I hope I felt like, how could you not hear this man?
Mhm.
But apparently, a lot of people in the room just kept on functioning the same way.
Mhm.
And still come to us and put pressure on us for incentives that perpetuate inequities. So I can see why, like, it's heavy, it's just this heaviness of
Yeah.
how, because they're systems. And they're so good at it, and they've worked for the people that they work for.
Mhm.
And so I think in the future, like, I'm gonna type this into Adrian. I don't know if it'll happen, but you know, he wants us to give topics for the retreat. I would love for you to come to the retreat. It's just my dream. I would love for you to come to the retreat to talk to us about, you know, really having that mindfulness and how do we invite the people that we represent, the corporations, our community partners, how do we invite them for discourse
Mhm.
in a healthy way?
Yeah, there's certainly things that you can do, and there's certainly things that we can learn from, and people we can learn from in history and contemporarily that do that well. And I think that I would love the opportunity to share those perspectives with you. I think that they're out there for us to have. We have the expertise internally, and we can truly do it.
Because when Commissioner Jarrell said, I'd like for all the advisory boards to have this, I agree with him. I don't think that's too much to ask. But I also would like for all of us to have that as a board to, like you said, like you can't make change if you don't approach it in a healthy way. So how do you do it in the healthiest way possible so that you can really crack the egg, as Commissioner Jarrell says? Anyway, it's just deep thinking. I really appreciate all the work. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, Commissioner Jarrell?
Can I put a parking lot, something based on what you just said, if you don't mind? And this, I guess, is between you and the Sean, kind of a parking lot. If we ever get to the space where somehow this information makes it to advisory boards or something as part of their, what I'm calling onboarding requirements, or whatever that looks like. Rewind. If we make it that goes to advisory boards, in some way circulate that and help them see the same presentation. What we also need to make sure is that we have a method as people become onboarded. What does that look like? Because people come on and off, and you want to find and ensure that we have a system that allows for that continued learning as new people join the board. And I don't know what that looks like, but I have thoughts, but just something that I'm saying, put a pin in it so we don't lose that as well.
Madam Chair, I do want to shout out Leslie and team because you guys do have the EJ subcommittee over there. So thank you for that work.
And I'm just making sure that we don't miss anything before we adjourn. I just, you know, on the goals, I think we've been making some progress, for sure, on land acquisition to protect drinking water, on tree canopy, on stormwater management, flood mitigation. So, I see some areas where through the Environmental Leadership Action Plan, even before this, we have made a positive difference for the environment. Hopefully we'll continue to do more of that. And if there's nothing additional,
Can it, and I think qualitatively that I get it. I guess I'd like to quantify it just a little bit more in some of the areas I think just need to be baked out, you know. I'm great with qualitative data. I think it's important, but I think quantitatively, I'm probably just disconnected from some of the areas. As far as measuring, you know, the outcome progress, and understanding the ultimate goal. So anyway, that's just where I am today.
it's all important questions, very
But
important.
we have made progress for sure, no question.
Yeah,
Can I ask just one?
Sure.
The environmental justice community partners, what's the next step with that?
Well, we have been, we have had an informational session about what we're hoping the group looks like, but we aren't convening the group until this is endorsed by the board. So
Okay.
it's on hold until we get to that stage.
Is it different than an advisory group? Like, are we trying to call it something different so it's not like the others?
Yes.
And so, can you say why about that?
Sure, so. One, we're trying to remove the political, right? We're trying to be intentional to ensure that we're hearing residents' voice and getting resident representation, because sometimes residents' viewpoint of inequities have stemmed because of political decisions, right? And so what we're trying to, even though this is government, not trying to be, these are board appointed and people have, we want to make sure that it's just residents that have an interest to be advocating and have connections to people and willing to not feel like they have a political influence, but they're really wanting to give their true selves to the space of dialoguing and pushing us through to ensure that we have that untainted view of what we need to hear as a resident's voice. So it's a little different than a person that's being a liaison for the board to try to give you as an input. We're trying to make sure that one of the things that's in here talks about, where is it? It's with the one that talks about. The role of government, and what we're trying to do is parts of the problem is. One is the programmatic part that we've talked about, things that we may just be doing wrong in our decision making, and that we as staff need to hear differently in order to influence our day-to-day operations and do things differently. But then the second part of it is involving them as an input as part of the decision making, involving them, meaning residents, in how do we become more intentional about getting information out? Like if we're trying to inform something about something that, say that's bad water quality. We have even seen it in our own engagement opportunities. Sometimes we had it in our first wave, it didn't work. We didn't get the people in the first wave in our traditional modes. The way that we got into the 500 is we called churches and people and organizations and neighborhood representation, and they said, yep, you can come. Yep, you will host a meeting. And so we're trying to get more of the grassroots experience as input versus a political one. And so that's why we have intentionally changed the name and not made it advisory, because we're trying to get it to be really the earth of the community. And the reality is, over time, it may not be slotted, but it only is like, it could be larger than an advisory group and a quantifiable number, because what ultimately you want is all the voices that want to come be able to speak. And when you get to that, a level of engagement and conversation and input, and they influence decisions, it's not just a small subset of somebody that got selected by a subset of a political group. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's kind of how we were approaching it.
Okay, it makes sense, but what doesn't make sense to me is how our other groups are political groups, because people apply to those groups.
But you appoint them. Reason why I
We
call them,
appoint them.
only reason I said political is because they are being appointed by an elected body. That's the reason why, that's the reference of how I call it political. You're selected by voters. And then you then select individuals to sit on advisory boards. And some people perceive that as an optic of political, even though they apply, but sometimes people make it recommendations of who you should select. I mean, there's other things that are part of that and who you are, what.
So how are you gonna select if we're not gonna be part of it? You know, you say you're seeking 11 to 13 members from blah, 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 blah. Like, they're just gonna come to meetings, or we're going to?
So what I would say is one of the first waves of interest that we've already started engaging with came from people that were part of this process, that were residents that showed up either in focus groups and ways and had conveyed an interest. That's one way.
Okay.
Another wave has been in some of the communities when we've reached out to groups to say, to the so-and-so neighborhood association and like, they say they want representation for their community. And so they have been self-identifying people that they would like us to consider to be part of their voice. So it's being more selected by the community, not selected by us, the board. And so we're allowing those, because right now it's manageable. Those people that have interest, so like, I know that we had an informational session, we kind of said, this is where it is. It's not completely defined because we're allowing them to also influence how it's gonna shape up and whatever. We're gonna try it on, figure it out. One of the other things that we're also trying to be, we're gonna do this regardless, but the other thing that we're trying to also be mindful of is we recently applied for a grant that's with EPA. And that grant also says that we have to be more grassroots community engagement. And so to fulfill that, we're hoping that if we are blessed with that grant, that we'll use the same body to carry us through that as well.
Okay, cool. All right, thank
We
you.
aren't blessed with it, but I'm gonna keep our fingers crossed. We would still go through this effort that we're doing independent. So we're trying to make them work together and solve those problems.
Okay, great.
And is that what the question was from Olivia?
Right, so Olivia, I'm sorry, there were 4 questions. Well, 3 questions. Olivia asked, has the process been identified within the EJ framework that addresses, mitigates, and amends past injustices? I think that the answer to that is that will come with the implementation plan if and when we get to this being endorsed by the board. She also asked, is there an update on the status of the community change grant submitted by the county? And I responded to her privately, just so I didn't want to like, I don't know, threads can get weird in Zoom sometimes. The update is that we should know something in a month. That's what the EPA has told us. And then Terry Lansdale asked, right now, every community in Mecklenburg County is undergoing community area plans as part of the UDO and is disbanding older plans. How is this committee able to impact this conversation in the community area planning process by the Charmac planning staff? I will say, I'll start and then I'll look to Dr. Johnson. We have been invited by the Planning Commission to come and give a presentation about that very topic in December. Obviously, we're gonna nix that because this isn't endorsed by the ESC at this time, because we don't want to have those conversations and try to get to the implementation phase of the framework until this is endorsed by the board. Dr. Johnson, do you want to add anything to that?
I think the other thing that I would just add is that one, Aaron and I have standing meetings with the city, so we try to keep each other apprised of what we're doing and try to the best of our ability, start ensuring that we're aligned. And they have environmental stewardship as a priority for them, and so they see the relationship. They have looked at elements early on of what we're doing, and they're hoping to do something that's similar. So there's evolution that we're doing and trying to be collaborative with, starting with the city of Charlotte's municipality, but we have conversations with others within our municipality about a host of other things as well. So we're slowly trying to ensure that we're doing this not in our own bubble, but to see if we can get our community to be with us as we're doing these types of changes. And as Aaron noted, what we wanted to do is before we really are going out in this instance, the city staff getting some type of endorsement, yet our board is already behind this and that we're sharing it at that time. So the intent was that we would share, but once we get to the place that we've gotten some, not just presenting to this environmental stewardship committee, but we got some type of agreement or endorsement from the group.
Does that hurt the timeline for the city? You know what Terry wrote? Like he said that they're taking input. Does that hurt the timeline that we're delayed?
I mean, so Terry's asking about the community area planning, which has been going on for about 18 months now. I've been representing our environmental justice framework as still something that is iterative and hasn't been approved by the board yet. So I would say no, namely because I believe, and I'll rely on Dr. Johnson to correct or amend. I think that that is an implementation phase of the community area plan, capital area planning, in my opinion. But I don't work for the city, so I'll take that with a grain of salt.
So it's just been a decades-long struggle to get the city to consider the environment in decision-making. And I just hate for any delay, like time delay, to hurt it. But thank you to Terry and Olivia, like they're the real deal, always like really committed to the health and wellness of the county. You know, I listen to the planning commission meetings and it's amazing the detail that Terry goes into, like thinking about the future. And it's really nice to have that as a representative from Mecklenburg County. So thank you guys. And if there's nothing else, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Rodriguez McDowell, seconded by Commissioner Jarrell. All in favor? Say aye. And the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.